So yeah, I want to get right into it and talk about your art for that. Your art, even in a broader sense.
Sure.
The piece that is on the scarf or bandana, whatever you want to call it, was that something you had already done, or was that something you made for this project?
No, it's something that I had already made. Actually, Ben came to my studio like right before the pandemic, and maybe in like January or February, and there's a painting of that bandana, and then he saw the painting, and then later on, I did like a work on paper, like a watercolor of the same design, with a couple of tweaks. And so when he contacted me about doing the bandana, I was trying to think like, oh, which design would work. And I remember he really liked the painting, and the painting just happened to be square. So I was like, oh, it's a no-brainer. You know, he's already seen the artwork, and this is like a newer version of it. So yeah, so that's kind of how it came about.
You use a lot of different colors, vibrant colors. I love the oranges and the reds you use, and a lot of your imagery has a lot going on. There's like kind of like this where there's like four quadrants, but some of your stuff is split in two, or there's like multiple imagery, but it seems like they're all connected to like one message. Can you speak a little bit about the like four pieces of this specific piece and that style in general? How do you connect these different pieces of imagery?
That the piece I made for the bandana is part of a larger body of work, and essentially the entire body of work is about being a father. So I have a young kid. He's 5 years old, and I started thinking about what would my wife and I do if like a truck hit us both tomorrow and we just disappeared, and he was kind of left to fend for himself, and he's so young, he really doesn't know he wouldn't really know who his parents are, and we wouldn't be able to like finish our job of being parents. And also at that same time, I'd been reading him a lot of children's books, and I realized that children's stories are a way that parents pass on their belief systems to their kids. So like, if you have a book about sharing, right, you're teaching your kid to play nice with others, or, we have a book about multiracial families because we're a multiracial family. Before I became a parent, I never realized that I thought children's books were just a form of entertainment. And then once I had a kid, I was like, oh, these are like actually ways that we pass on our beliefs, our knowledge, how we view the world. And so this painting is part of a whole series of paintings dealing with those ideas. So each painting starts with a line of text. So in this painting, the text is "No gods, no masters," which can be read many different ways. So like, it's actually like an anarchist chant, from protests. But also, you can think of it as gods and masters, like in a literal sense, but also like you can be a slave. Your job can be your master, your cultural community can be your god or master. And it's really about being your own person and not letting those around you influence or kind of manipulate who you are. So each of these different quadrants references different parts of my background or talks about some of these like universal themes. So for instance, the three guys on the magic carpet, I was born in Iran, so but I grew up in America. I'm Iranian American, and my entire life, like I've been like, as a kid, I was like teased about like, oh, do you fly on carpets in Iran? And or people asking me if my dad wears a turban, and really just people not understanding like the culture in the background. And so it's like this very stereotypical image of what people in the Middle East look like. And then it's coupled with like the NASA logo, and which is a very like American thing, right? And so these guys are on this flying carpet. Jokingly, when Ben was over, I was telling him I think of these guys as like the Iranian NASA, So it's kind of like poking fun at some of these stereotypes, but also like highlighting them, but also clashing these two different cultures, right? Like NASA, something that's very American, very patriotic, and then this like stereotypical image of like people in the Middle East. Or, and then in the bottom quadrant, or bottom right, you have this woman, like a stylish woman, putting on her lipstick, but then her shadow is like this kind of like devil Satan character. So it's kind of for me that symbolized, how everyone has two sides. You can meet someone and you can think they're like really pure and clean, and later on, as you get to know them, you find out that they have this other side of them. So that's like, for instance, like, so the guys on the carpet, they come from like just like a old random comic book that I found, and then the woman putting on her lipstick is from like a lipstick ad from the Victorian era. So the images are coming from like vastly different sources, some of them old, some of them new. Obviously, the NASA logo is like this like vector illustration that a graphic designer did. And then the that kind of angel character at the bottom left corner is from a Persian miniature. And so it's from this ancient manuscript, and it's this angel summoning the other angels to come down to Earth. And then at the top left corner is a silhouette of the human nervous system. And a lot of the paintings from the series has a lot of imagery referencing human anatomy and the body. And my son, for whatever reason, he became obsessed with human anatomy. And so everything, like, he knows more than most high school kids about how the body works. And he's 5. He doesn't know how to read or write, but he can tell you about everything about every organ, how it works.
Wow.
And so we've been trying to nurture that, but also I realized that what's interesting about that is, he's constantly studying like the insides of people. And when, so this piece is, like a lot of it's talking about kind of like living in the multicultural East meets West world. And, when you take off the skin off everyone, everybody looks the same underneath, so he's kind of like going into life learning about the insides of people literally, rather than like focusing on the outside. So he's like completely obsessed with it. So there's a lot of symbolism and visual kind of connections going on between all these various elements to kind of tell the story that's wrapped around the text, which is no gods, no master. I don't know, that was a long-winded answer.
I love it. I want to back up a little bit and talk about like how you first met Ben and Bobby. I actually talked to Ben a little bit earlier, and he was telling me about like Beautiful Decay and how you guys first met up. Do you remember how you guys linked up?
Yeah. So I used to publish a magazine called Beautiful Decay. I started in high school, very similar to how the Hundreds was started. It started as like a hobby, just something for fun. And then it kind of turned into like a real business. It started as like mostly like a graffiti magazine with like a little bit of music, slowly morphed into like a lifestyle publication. And before we knew it, we were selling advertising to a lot of streetwear brands and to record labels, everything with kind of like an underground DIY spin. And then later on, we had our own t-shirt line, and we never collaborated with the Hundreds, but, we would see each other at trade shows. And so I remember Bobby and Ben when, it was just the two of them, and they had like 4 shirts in like one store. So, I've known them since the very beginning, kind of on and off. And so that's kind of how we met. And I feel like the first memory I have of meeting them in person was probably at the Magic Trade Show. And I remember they had this tiny little booth, like literally it was like a folding table. And I remember they had these like red and white promo shirts that they gave me. I have no idea where this shirt is, but maybe Bobby remembers, but I think maybe there was like a Disney reference or something. It was just like a one color white tee. And I don't think they made it just for Magic. I wonder if he remembers what that shirt is. I'd love to see it now.
I'm sure this will remember.
Yeah. And I knew, and I was really excited to meet Ben because he was kind of in a similar world as me, and he's also Iranian. Most Iranians are either doctors or lawyers or engineers, and I know Ben has his law degree, but then he went into clothing. I always thought that was really cool because there's not a lot of us in the industry, there's maybe like 3 or 4 people in the whole world that were kind of like into it.
This collaboration's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And it's such an interesting project to collaborate on. I think these are, without the pandemic, I don't know that, who knows if we would have done bandanas or anything like that. So it's crazy how it took something like that to spawn this project, but get all these great artists together.
Right.
What else are you working on right now?
I'm working on a bunch of things. I have a show opening up in LA in September at Shulamit Nazarian Gallery in Hollywood, and then in October, sometime right before the election, I have a project with the San Jose Institute of Contemporary Art, which is a museum in San Jose, and I'm going to be doing a large billboard for them. And then in January, I'll have a solo show in New York at Denny Dimon Gallery. So I had a lot of projects that were supposed to happen already, and they all kind of got postponed with COVID. And so now they're all kind of like rolling out in October and, 2021, if there's still a planet after the election.
Yeah, if we have a 2021, that'll be amazing.
Yeah. Who knows when November, or what happens in November.
How else has the pandemic and like all of the things that went with it, how has it affected your process and your ability to work and kind of move forward?
I mean, in a sense, it hasn't affected me too much because I usually work in solitude or only with like a couple of assistants, in my studio. So my day-to-day hasn't changed. Really, the biggest change has been with my son and him not being in school because my wife and I both work. So actually, I started doing these watercolors, like this one specifically that we use for the bandana. I started making them at home on my dining room table while I was watching my son, because I couldn't, for a while there was like a complete lockdown and I still wanted to make something every day. So I started actually doing these works on papers just to kill time. And my son would do these like human body collages, these anatomically correct collages on our dining room table. And I would just make these little works on paper at home. And now they've turned into a whole body of work. So I have dozens of them, and I'm going to be doing a show of all of them at some point somewhere. But that's why if you look at even on the bandana, it's dated, 2020, and it says made during the COVID-19 quarantine. Because I almost used them as a diary, like every day I would go and like make them just to kill time. And what was interesting was they're all about my son and my relationship to him and teaching him. And now I was making the watercolors sitting right next to him, like while I was watching him. And so that was pretty interesting because every once in a while he'd be like, "Oh, what is that? Why are you painting the human body on that?" And he'd be like on this one, the bandana, I showed him the real bandana and he was like, "Where's the heart? You forgot the heart on the body." So he doesn't even look at it as art. He's just like, "Why isn't it like completely?" I'm like, "Oh, well, it's the nervous system." He's like, "Oh, okay, cool, okay."
Wow. Are we going to see any of his collages at your show?
No, not at my show, but I can send them to you. I put them on my Instagram all the time because there's literally thousands of them. They're everywhere. I actually have like a giant life-size human body collage on the ground over there, and I was actually somebody contacted me about getting images of me wearing the bandana. And actually, I took a bunch of photos of my son wearing it because I thought it would be more interesting if he was wearing it because like the piece is about him and then everything else I'm making is about him.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I took some fun photos of him wearing them.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Especially now that we know, it's about him and the context of this art. What are these snakes at the bottom?
Oh, so that's, that was like a piece of clip art that I just found, but it's kind of like a, what is it called? A Ouroboros. It's like that snake that's eating its own tail, but it's a double one.
Yeah.
So it's like these two, for me, I just visually, I thought it made sense the, with the piece. Sometimes I'll find an image and I don't really even know the source of the image, but for me, it just makes sense. For like the painting I'm doing. And, I had a friend over at my studio. She was like, oh, that's from like some fantasy movie. She like recognized it immediately. And for me, I was like, that's great. It didn't really even matter. So some of the things are like very recognizable. And then some of them are like, for me to just make sense. But for me, I was thinking about, like a lot of things about, that I associate with religion is like kind of like something that kind of eats itself, or it's kind of a lot of times it's meant to like kind of control people in one direction or another. And I've always, my entire life, I've had a complicated history with religion and belief systems. And now in my old age, I'm just like a cranky atheist. So I almost saw it almost like as a yin and a yang, like two sides of every story, but then it's like it's also eating itself.
Your friend that said
Yeah.
a fantasy movie, were they talking about Never Ending Story?
I mean, it might be. Yeah, I think it might be from the Never Ending Story. Does that ring a bell with you?
Not at first, but after I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, I think that is from Never Ending Story, or there's something like it in the movie.
Yeah, I think so.
Is the watercolor something you were always doing, or was that something?
You know what? It is from the Never Ending Story. It's the Orin,
Or yeah,
the mystical Ouroboros talisman, Never Ending Story. So so this is something from like, obviously it's from like pop culture, but for me, I don't care about the pop culture reference. I just thinking about it in the context of the painting. So that's why some of the things are advertising. And I kind of like the fact that I didn't know that it was from, a movie. I think I just saw a pendant on like Pinterest or on Google image search,
so many people can take so many different interpretations from, especially a work like this where there's so many different elements of it.
Yeah.
People will find all sorts of interpretations of it. That's cool.
Yeah, well, another thing is I'm really interested in like hybrids, like I grew up being really interested, very similar to Bobby. I grew up in like the hardcore scene and the punk scene. And then later on I got interested in a lot of like independent hip hop, and all of those worlds are about creating hybrids, right? And then like you think about like streetwear or like graffiti or street art, all that stuff is just, it's a lot of cultural hybrids. It's like taken from high and low, things that are obscure and mainstream and kind of mashing them up. And then culturally, I'm that too. Like I come from like this like traditional Iranian background, but then I grew up in America, skateboarding and doing graffiti, and so I think the work kind of reflects that. It's like a cultural hybrid collage of all these different references.
Did you grow up in Baltimore, or did you go to school in Baltimore?
I went to school in Baltimore. Yeah.
That's where I'm from. All my family's from.
Oh, okay. What part of Baltimore?
Like my mom's side is all on the Eastern Shore, like Ken Island, and then my dad's side is from Baltimore, like Ricerstown Road.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I lived there for like 4.5 years. I went to Mike at art school out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, Baltimore's a crazy place.
For,
The first time, I grew up in Virginia, right outside of DC. So I spent a lot of time like skateboarding and doing graffiti in DC, and then I lived in Baltimore for a while. And both DC and Baltimore, especially back then, were like they're just hoods. Like, they were just so dangerous. Then I remember when I first moved to LA, I was living in Culver City, like pretty close to South Central, and I was like, let me go check out the South Central. I didn't know anything about LA, and I go down there. I'm like, people have fucking trees here and grass, and the houses have yards. I was like, how dangerous can it possibly be? Buildings are literally on fire during the day in Baltimore. Like entire city blocks are like boarded up. I was so shocked by like the difference in, like quote unquote bad neighborhoods, And I was like, I would fucking live in South Central. What's the big deal? Like, Because in Baltimore, like, oh my God, but the neighborhood I lived in was so bad, you know?
The watercolors you've been doing, you said you've been doing works on paper throughout the pandemic.
Mhm.
You always doing watercolor, or some of the other work of yours I thought was more oil paintings and
Yeah, no. Well, these are technical. I call them watercolor. They're technically not water. They're just watered down acrylic paint.
oh, okay,
But they kind of look like watercolors. So just for sake of,
especially in the
but
back.
no, yeah, they're just like washy and really watered down, and then they're on paper, so it soaks up the paint. And there's a lot of pencil work, you know, like a lot of the outlines are pencil. But the paintings are all acrylic on canvas. So my paintings are like very, very tight and controlled. And what I like about working on paper is like it's a little bit less precious. I can be a little bit more loose and gestural. So that's why at first I just started doing it for fun. And I was like, you know, it's kind of nice not to have to spend 2 months on something before it's done. I could just like make something in a couple of days. So
Yeah,
it just kind of like satisfies a different part of your brain, you know?
I was gonna ask how long this piece took to make.
I mean, I don't do any of these in one sitting because I'm watching my kid and he's got like a short attention span.
Yeah.
So like maybe like an hour and a half at a time, like maybe like 6 or 7 days with like an hour to 2 hours at a time spent on it. So not that long. It's small. It's like, it's
Yeah,
actually kind of like the size of the bandana. I think it's like,
pretty true to size.
yeah, it's like 13 or 14 inches each side.
And I mean, you said you were doing t-shirts and other apparel with Beautiful Decay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was, so, you know, we started it like maybe like 2006. So we used to share. So what happened was Beautiful Decay shared offices with the Agenda Trade Show with Aaron Levant.
Yeah.
He was like an old friend of mine, and I just knew him just from just being in the community. And so I started renting a small office from his larger office space. And then at a certain point, you know, we'd have lunch together every day. And Aaron was like, well, we have we rep clothing lines. You know, a ton of artists. You should just make some shirts and we'll sell them for you. So it really just started like that with just like 4 shirt designs. And we would commission different artists that we featured in the magazine to do shirts for us. So there was no branding on the clothing at all. It was just like a giant graphic. And it was right when big graphics got really big, like really big, complicated graphics. So we did really well with it, you know, until about 2009 when the economy crashed and like all the independent, stores just all went up. You know, it was like overnight, like I think 350 of our accounts closed overnight. But before that, I thought that I was like, man, this clothing thing is super easy compared to magazines. You know, I mean, magazine business is brutal. Yes, I was like, t-shirts, this is like printing money. But you know, we did like cut and sew hoodies for a while. We did a lot of collaborations. Like back then, we did collaborations with like King Stampede and like a bunch of other brands. So we were in the mix for a while. But I always came to it from an art perspective rather than like a clothing, perspective. So I just wanted to make whatever I wanted to make. And, as I'm sure you know, like with clothing, like if people don't know what brand it is, that's a big part of it. And we didn't even have like tags on our shirts a lot of times. Like it was like just like artwork,
I was gonna ask if this was the first time you had done, art that wasn't necessarily designed to be apparel but ended up as apparel, like taking something that you did and putting it on clothing or an accessory.
Yeah, I think so. It might be. I think so, yeah, because I designed some stuff for Beautiful Decay, but I never thought of it as like my own personal artwork. I was like I was like doing like illustration work, but and I never really enjoyed doing it. I was okay at it, but it wasn't really like the, I always came from like a more fine art world. So like for me, this is a lot more exciting because it's whatever I just happen to make, and it translates well. it's a lot more satisfying this way.
It's beautiful, man. I can't wait to get one.
Thanks.
It came out crazy. Amir, I appreciate you taking the time, and
Yeah, thanks, man.
it's nice to meet you and talk.
Yeah, same here.
And like I've been looking at this bandana for the last 2 weeks and how cool it was, but now to like hear the story behind it and how you made it and what it means is really cool. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a
All
good
right, have a good one. Bye.